Hi, and welcome to Meetings in Math. You are here for section 9.4, Volume of Prisms. Our essential question is, how do I find the volume of a prism? Today you will need your Jaguar Jots on section 9.4, a pen or pencil, a highlighter may be useful, a calculator to keep our calculations moving along quickly, your bright ideas, your determination, and as always, your problem-solving skills. Let's begin with a definition of volume. The volume of a three-dimensional figure is the measure of the amount of space that it occupies, and volume is measured in cubic units. The volume of a prism, we find the area of the base of the prism, and then we multiply it by the height or the number of layers. I like to think of it as a layer cake. We find the area of that first layer, and then we multiply it by how many layers do we have, and then that gives you the volume. It's a really nice way to think about it because we can make that shape any shape that we want. It can be any shape we want. It could even be a star. And so long as I know the area of that base, all of that area, and then however many layers of cake I have, that's going to give me the total volume. So we use this formula, V equals capital B times H. And that capital B means base area. And it's just a thing that we use. Everybody uses it. Capital B means base area. And volume equals base area times height is how we say it. So let's go ahead and do a problem. Volume of a rectangular prism. Find the area of the base of the prism, and then we're going to find the volume of the prism. So we always begin by writing the plan. And so our plan is volume equals base area times the height. And then we identify the variables that we need and find the ones that we can. That is how I always like to start, with a plan and a roadmap. It's a whole lot easier to get where we're going if we have a roadmap. So the base is going to be a rectangle. Now, any pair of parallel faces can be the base in a rectangular prism. So just pick one and then keep track of your choice. That's what makes rectangle prisms awesome in one hand and then really confusing on the other. I could pick the front faces, I could pick the top and the bottom, or I could pick the side faces. It doesn't really matter. I just have to be really consistent. And that's the other reason we write our work down. It's so that I can keep track of what I did. So I am picking the bottom. So you can see right here, I picked 8. And I highlighted it out here as well. So 8 by 2, I'm writing it down. So big B is going to be little b times 8, or base area times height. And I'm doing the same thing with my variables here, mostly so that if somebody needs to help me, they can understand where I'm getting my information from. So little b times 8, so 8 times 2 is 16. I'm showing my substitution and my answer. Please make sure you're doing both of those. So writing the equation, showing the substitution, and your answer. So now that I know base area, or big B, I can actually put it here. And this is why it's really important to keep track of what you've already used. I've already used the 8 and the 2 as my base area. My 8 and 2 here is my base. So that means that's what I'm calling my base. And my height always connects up my bases. So my height then has to connect those up. So my height is the 10. This is why it's important to write these down. Because if somebody was helping me and I wrote something different here, it'd be really easy for the person helping me to see where I went wrong. So now I substitute those two in to my formula and I get 160 centimeters cubed. Why am I using centimeters cubed? Because it's volume, and volume always uses cubic units. So now let's look at the volume of a triangular prism. Triangular prisms are a little bit easier because the base is very obvious which one's the base. They're a little bit more difficult though because you really have to look at it and be able to find that base. So we're going to start in the exact same way where we begin by writing the plan, which is volume equals base area times height. Even though it's a triangle, it's still base area times height. We'll worry about that 1/2 in just a second because the volume of the prism, we're talking about prism here, is base area times the height. So now we go find the things that we need to go find. It is a triangle. The base is the triangle. And so now is when we write that base is equal to 1/2 base times height. Remember, this is the base area is equal to 1/2 base times height. So I went ahead and I just drew the triangle out here because it gets messy in here. You need to remind yourself that base and height in a triangle are where they meet at the 90 degrees. If you don't remember that, jot that down right now in your notes. I'll say it one more time. Your base and your height of your triangle is where they meet at 90 degrees. So there's the 90 degrees, one of them. So that's 24. How do I know that that's 24 and that 24 is the same? Because they're parallel. So at 24 and at 7 is where they meet at 90 degrees. So which one's base and which times height doesn't really matter because they're being multiplied together and we can multiply in either order. So I'm going to substitute that in and then I'm going to evaluate. I did 1/2 of 24 to get to 12. And so my base area is 84. Now that I know my base area is 84, I substitute it in here. And now that I'm looking at this, I can see I have two things I haven't used. 25 is the hypotenuse of my triangle. It's this part right here. 3 is what connects my two parallel bases. So 3 is my height. 3 is what goes between the two. See how this would be on the same plane? And then 3 goes, off the triangle. That's how you know it's the height between the two. So 3 is my height. So now I'm going to substitute that into my formula. So important you're writing down your formulas. So then you're just substituting and evaluating. 84 times 3 is 252 centimeters cubed, or cubic centimeters. Right now, I'd like you to pause and define what is the base of a prism. The base of a prism are the congruent and parallel faces. If we don't know what those are, it's going to be really hard to do these problems. So remember, they are the congruent and parallel faces. So now let's look at this problem right here. Now we've taken away those two helper questions and we're just going to go through it. So remember, always begin by writing the formula. Volume equals base area times height, and then write down those three things: volume, base area, and height. Some of you might be able to write down your height immediately. If you can, great. Write it down, get it out of the way. Others of you might not be able to, and that's okay too. But we know that we have to go find the base. And so the base here is a triangle. We are going to then write down the formula for that. We want to write down formulas as soon as we know what we're working with to free up our head for the problem solving and the working and not the remembering and the memorization. If we can free up more of our brain for working, we will be much more successful. So now here's my triangle. Remember that we're going to find the base and the height around the right angle. So it's the 6 and the 7. It doesn't matter which one's the 6 and which one's the 7, to be honest. So now I have 1/2 of 7 times 6. I took half of the 6 and got 3. And 3 times 7 is 21. So now I know my base area is 21. So I'm going to bring it back up to my original. And so I know my base area is 21. And now it's just a matter of finding my height. Remember, the height connects the two parallel bases. So here's my face. My base is here, and here's the other base, which means 8 is what connects them up. So my height is 8. So now I substitute it in and I evaluate, and I get 168 centimeters cubed. So what about finding the volume of a prism? That is a rectangular prism. Now, if I told you to go do this problem and come back and I chose a different base than you chose, our work would look very different, but our answers would end up being the same. The one thing that wouldn't look any different, though, is our first step. Everybody would start off exactly like this. So then what is our base? It is a rectangle. Now, this is where we might start looking a little bit different. I'm going to choose the very bottom, that 10 by 4, as my base. And so I'm going to do 10 by 4. and I'm going to get 40. Now that I have my 10 by 4, and that I know my base area is 40, I bring that back up to my big plan. And now remember that the height connects those two parallel bases. So if you look over at the diagram, you can see I've highlighted out the bases. And so now I need to connect them up with the height. And the height is 3. So my height is 3. And now I substitute that into my formula, which means instead of B, I put 40, and instead of H, I put 3. And I get 120 centimeters cubed. So now let's look at this one. This is not a shape we've dealt with. You've probably never found the area of a pentagon. This is a pentagonal prism. But we're going to start it in the same way. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do the first step and then come on back. So hopefully you did the first step by writing the formula. Volume equals base area times height, and then you listed out volume, base area, and height. You may have even been able to fill in the height. You should have been able to even know that you needed to go find the base, and the base was a pentagon, and that's okay. You don't know what to do with a pentagon, but I want you to look at the diagram again. And the diagram says something very interesting. This time it has an arrow pointing to it, and it has a capital B, and it says capital B equals 86 meters squared. And we know capital B means something. We know capital B means base area. And it's given to us. It says that the base area is 86. And so we're just going to go right back to our original plan, and we're going to plug in that 86 because, hey, it's been given to us. So we really didn't have a whole lot of extra work to do right there. And then it says H. Well, remember that it's going to connect up our two congruent bases. So here's our two congruent bases. And what is connecting up our two congruent bases but that 15? So we're going to connect it with that 15. And so now I have that 86 and that 15. I'm going to pause this right now, or you're going to pause this, and you're going to finish this problem and come back. So now that you finish this problem, you substituted in 86 and 15, 86 for capital B and 15 for H. And now 86 times 15 is 1,290 meters cubed. That was it. You are hoping for problems like this where they give you the base area, because that takes half the problem away and you're just substituting straight into volume equals base area times height. So what about a prism that looks like this? This still has a base. The base that's congruent, you're looking for congruent bases, is kind of like this house shape. And then it got pushed back and there's that house shape again. It's just our base happens to be a composite figure, but we can still do this problem. We start off in the exact same way. What do we write down? We write down that volume equals base area times height, and we write down our three variables. It's just we're going to have to do a little bit more work for this than maybe we've been used to. So what is our base? Our base happens to be this house shape. We're going to do some extra work because it's a composite shape. It's the rectangle and the triangle. So the rectangle is that 6 by 8. We'll do that one real fast. So 6 by 8 would be 48. And the triangle, you can see that the triangle they tell you right here is 4 tall. But what's the base? Well, it has to have the same base as the rectangle because it sits on top of the rectangle. So if this here's 8, it pushes up and it also has to be 8. And then it was 4 tall. So then 1/2 of 8 times 4 would be 4 times 4, which is 16. So you take that composite shape and you add that 48 and 16 and you get 64. And so, yeah, it took us a little bit of extra time, but we were still able to do it because we know how to deal with composite shapes. So just because something looks a little more confusing doesn't mean we throw up our hands and we say, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with it. We take a step back and we say, what would have I done before? So we know the base area. The base area is 64. Now it comes to the height. Remember, the height's going to connect up those two congruent parallel faces. So what connects those up but 5? So now we substitute those in. 64 times 5 is 320 centimeters cubed. I expect there to be a lot of work on your problems when you're doing these. I expect there to be a lot of work on your papers when you're doing these problems because you have to do so many sub-problems to get there. But you can do these. You just have to remember to do those little bits and pieces as you find them. Remember, anytime you can chunk things into a smaller problem, you can do it. What I'd like you to do now is explain to someone why volume equals base area times height in terms of an everyday object. I use the idea of a cake. Can you figure out something else? Think of those stacks of things. Thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to see you in our next lesson. Remember, be kind to each other because we can all use some extra kindness in our lives. Bye for now.